Welcome to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast, where we share all things people stuff in leadership. Learn from leaders who have done the hard yards and learn from experience. Hear from expert authors about the latest insights from culture to strategy and messy people dynamics. Get tips and insights from multiple award-winning author and leadership expert herself, Zoe Routh. Now, on with the show.
Hey, it's Zoe, your friendly neighborhood Canadian Australian leadership expert. And the question I have for you today is, have you ever thought about what characteristics you need in order to be a better leader? Well, I'm sure you have, because I certainly have. What should I focus on in terms of my own personal character that would lead me to better outcomes, better influence, and better persuasion as a leader? Well, my guest today, his name is Keith Renninson, and he's got a lot to say about this whole topic. He's got a fabulous background. He is a former U.S. Vietnam vet, and he served in the top secret elements in the Vietnam War. He got lost solo trekking in Nepal and talks a little bit about that. He wrote a book on it as a result. He's an avid skier, so you know I love that. He's a former financial advisor, and somewhere around the time he got lost in Nepal and was doing financial advising, he crafted a new career for himself, one as a storyteller, a speaker, and an author. He's the founder of the TRIP technique, which we do talk about in an interview towards the end, and the TRIP technique assessment, which I've taken, which was a valuable, insightful resource about how to develop these 4 characteristics of better leadership. So this is a rollicking good storytelling episode, so do enjoy, and let's get into it. Well, all the way from beautiful Denver, Colorado. Where's that place? Denver, Colorado. Oh, goodness. Welcome to the show, Keith Renninson.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with all the trials and tribulations.
I know. We've had a few false starts of getting the tech right. I think this is our 3rd platform that we're on. But we're here now, which is fantastic. Keith, because we're doing audio, of course, people can't see the beautiful background that you've put up there of the mountain resort where you operate in the winter. And it's just stunning. So you're a skier. Let's actually start there. Like, leadership, skiing, you're talking my kind of language because I do both. How did you end up, being a ski dude and blending that with leadership? How does that story pan out?
Well, I will take you back to 1995. I had been to Nepal once before with a girlfriend. And when I hit a bit of a mid-career crisis, I decided to take off and go again, but I went by myself. And I got lost within the first 4 hours of the first day of trekking. It took me several days to get to where the trailhead was because I had to take buses and all kinds of things back into the wilderness of Nepal. It was those kind of buses where there's this gigantic cliff that drops off and the bus is riding along the edge. It was one of those trips. So my whole life has been built upon, and I didn't really know it until I got home and started to write the book, was that I've been a tenacious individual my whole life, no matter what I get involved in. And when I got home from Vietnam, I wanted to go skiing because I had been in the jungles and it was hot, and I wanted to go home where it was snow. And so I came home and became a skier. But while I was on my trip to Nepal, I journaled every day. And I journaled about the things that I wanted to change in my life. And I meditated, and I really took the time to examine myself. I was there for 6 weeks, and I needed to find a new path for myself. I had been a certified financial planner for a very long time at that point. And so when I got home, I decided that I would start implementing everything that I did. And I closed down my insurance office, and I began the path of becoming a writer and a speaker. And my leadership has come from a variety of odd places, which most people don't experience. And that would be from the nonprofit arena. I raced bicycles and cars for a long time in different periods of my life. And in both instances, I was always the guy that put the event together, brought in all of the team that worked together, got everybody that was supposed to pull it off and make it happen. And so I learned leadership skills somewhat in the Army while I was in Vietnam, but then it translated over into civilian life very well when I got home. And I started looking at the different ways I could help guide people to both work their way up in the organization as well as performing well at whatever position they were in. So the skiing and the bicycling and the car racing all kind of contributed through the nonprofits things that I got involved in. And I learned leadership skills there. And I looked at all of the character traits that really wrap up a leader. And I wrote a whole bunch of them on my whiteboard here in the office and to be prepared for you today. And they were words like open-minded and confident and positive and communicative and decisive. All of these things, as I look back at my life, were things that I acquired from other people. And they gave me the courage to be able to become a good leader and to have fun with it and not look at it as drudgery. I think a lot of leaders don't like being leaders. And I think that's why they're poor. They're really bad at it. So I think I went a very roundabout way to kind of answer your question there. And I hope I did.
No, that was great. So I've got some follow-up questions. So when you say you got traits from other people, what do you mean by that?
I think I got taken underneath the wing of a bunch of mentors and didn't know it at the time until I started looking back on it years later. And there was a man who I officed with for a long time who was a colonel in the United States Army, and he had gotten home from Vietnam about 10 years before I did. He was over in the early years of Vietnam. And he mentored me in starting into the insurance business for about the next 15 years. And him being an officer and me being an enlisted man, I looked up to him. I would always respond to him, yes or no, sir. It was just sort of built in, even though we were just friends and we weren't in the military any longer. And he, along with other people, as I moved along that mentored me in the variety of different things that I did, they all gave me really nice suggestions. You might think about doing it this way. You might approach this problem that way. And being in the financial industry, I had to learn those kinds of things in sales anyway. Because when you're dealing with other people's money, you want to make sure you're doing what they want you to do. And you're doing it in a way that you both work together. You're collaborating. And a lot of skills came out of all of that. And when I started putting on the events with the Tour de Cure with the American Diabetes Association, we had a crew of 130 people putting on a bike race that included 2,000 people over 100 miles in the Colorado Rockies behind me.
That's tough.
I had to learn how to handle all of those volunteers. And I found it a tremendously satisfying challenge because they were there to have fun and they were there to give somebody else a good time and they were willing to work hard. As long as you gave them, that idea that you were a confident leader, that you had a good game plan, you had everything mapped out, they trusted you. And I think that you became accountable because of that. And it was one of those things where I have great communication skills. I was born with them. I'm just a talker. So my communication skills were always right up front and right in their face, and they knew they could talk to me about anything. And there were some closed door sessions and some open door sessions, but I got a reputation for doing it really well. And I hope that doesn't come across egotistical. I'm just very proud of it.
It's good to be proud of your abilities. And thank you for showcasing that, because not often do people say, I'm really proud of my particular skill in this, and being genuine with it without being over the top arrogant. I think I was reading about humility with Vanessa Edwards. Yeah, she had a little thing on that. And humility is not talking about yourself. It's acknowledging your own strengths without thinking that you're special, which I think is
so true. That's a great way to put it. Yes.
Yeah, I think that was a nice distinction, because being humble doesn't mean that you're self-effacing.
No. I kind of got some of this, if I can go back even further in time. I'm 74 in December. And so my first experiences was with my father, who worked at a dynamite factory of all places.
Wow.
I told everybody I had an explosive childhood. It's a bad joke. Anyway, my father worked his way up from a common laborer on the dynamite plant up to where he was a supervisor over two different areas of it, over 42 years of working in that environment. And I worked there 2 summers and couldn't stand it. It was awful. I don't know how he did it for all of those years, because nitroglycerin gives you headaches. when you're exposed to it. And he would come home every night with a terrible headache. But anyway, we had to live in a company town. It was a little town called Leviers. In France, they would pronounce it Louviers because the DuPonts were French. And Leviers was a small company town, much like most mining communities have, where they have the town that surrounds the mine and all the workers live in the town. This was the same kind of environment. And so I knew all the men that worked on the plant because I grew up with them, with their kids. Well, an odd thing happened as my father worked his way up the ladder was that DuPont had, what did they call it? Anti-fraternization, can't say that word, policies, where dad couldn't play with the people that were under him. And the people that were above him had the same order. So dad couldn't play with the people that were above him. So when their off hours came, my dad didn't have anybody to spend any time with. And I watched him struggle with that. We went to a small town for a vacation one summer, and there were two of the men that were on the management team that were vacationing with their families in the same resort, and they wouldn't talk to dad while we were there. And it embarrassed my mom. It made my dad feel bad. It kind of put a whole negative spin on the whole vacation, but I never forgot that. Here was a situation where management wasn't communicating with the people under them because of a company rule. And I swore back then, if I ever got into a position of leadership where I had a lot of people under me, I didn't care if they were the guy cleaning the bathrooms or the vice president in charge of finance. I'd treat them all the same. And that has served me well. And I felt so sorry for my dad that he had to put up with that his whole career. And he never really had a lot of close friends because of it. It was really a hard thing to deal with. But leadership comes from odd places sometimes, the experience that we get from it. And that one was well seated in I was born in 47. So in the 50s, this was pretty much foundation laying stuff for a young man, a kid growing up.
Absolutely. And as you tell that story, I'm thinking about rules that we put in organizations that probably had a good intention. Not sure what the intention was behind, you can't talk to the people underneath you or above you, except to reinforce authority. And that comes from the history of the time, coming out of the Great Depression and the two world wars, and that sort of need for regulation. I'm hazarding a guess there. And fast forwarding to your experience in Vietnam in the military, how did communication and fraternization articulate itself there? Was it different or was it the same?
Well, I have lived a blessed life. I was starting to take computer classes in 1967 and 68 that were very basic. There was something about the machinery that was available at that time that sparked an interest in me. So I started studying it. Well, I got drafted because I was between colleges, and I got drafted before I could really finish the courses. But when I got into basic training and they put you all through those batteries of tests and questionnaires and stuff, they discovered I had a background in computers, albeit a minimal one, but it was still there. And so I ended up with a top secret security clearance coming out of basic training. And I went directly to my first duty station without going through any more further training, like the guys that were headed to Vietnam in the infantry or the armored divisions or things of that nature. And so I worked in a top secret security clearance facility in Texas, testing civilian made weapons very quickly and early on after leaving basic. Well, when I came down for levy for Vietnam, they put me into a supply outfit that was also top secret. I ran in what was known back in those days as an IBM 36050 computer with the big tape drives that went around in circles and, yeah. had a huge disk drive. It was 3 feet across, not like what we've got on our computer these days. In fact, what I have on my phone is just as powerful as that computer was back in 1969. But anyway, I didn't get to experience Vietnam the way most men did. I did go on guard duty at night, and that was the only place I did see any action, which thank God was minimal. But I worked all day long with people that were trying to get information into the computer so that they could make decisions. We were at what was known as the MACV headquarters in Saigon, which was the Military Assistance Command Vietnam. And that's where all the generals were. This is where everybody studied their battle plans and all the statistics and everything. And so we gathered all of those statistics for them to make their decisions on. And it was about helicopter parts and ammunition and tanks. And we had all of that inventory, what was going in, what was coming out, what was destroyed, how much were we using. So I said I was blessed. I was blessed in that I did not have to go into the field and be that part of Vietnam. And so I worked with leadership, guys that were generals. I was on a first name basis with. It was very strange. But when we were working, when I would see them walking on the compound, I still had to salute and I still had to say yes or no, sir. And we were back to general, sir, or major, sir. So it was very different. But even so, in the Army back then, leadership had a very defined role, and you knew exactly where you stood all the time, no matter who you were talking to. And that was so different than what my father had gone through with Leviers. And so I actually was comfortable in the military because of that. I could, when it's defined and you understand it and you can see it, then suddenly you understand how it functions and you can do your job.
So if I understand the difference correctly, it was the hierarchy existed in the military from a functional point of view. At De Beers, it wasn't necessarily functional. It was social or something.
You said it earlier. It was hierarchical. Yeah. It was all about management and control. Let me give you one other little tidbit about Leviers. It sat out on the prairie south of Denver, and it had 3 levels of ground. There was the management houses were up on the hill.
Oh, no.
The main workers were in the middle, and the guys that were at the bottom were down near the creek. And so even the village had 3 different levels to it, and it was done intentionally.
Wow, that's the articulation of social status differentiation made into form.
Totally.
Wow.
Yes, totally.
And so that's different in the military, because I haven't served in the military. I'm trying to understand the difference.
Okay.
The difference because there is hierarchy in the military.
Totally.
And there is status.
Without a doubt.
In the military. So what is the difference between the Leviers experience and the military in terms of hierarchy and status?
Leviers had a lot of men that weren't open-minded. And the management that was there were all college graduates, which back in the late 40s, early 50s was still a huge deal. It wasn't like today where everybody graduates from college, or at least we feel like they do. And so all of the other men were all either high school or never graduated from high school. And it was how can I put this? They were in a different world because they did all of the analysis of how the dynamite was being sold, how it was being used, what kind of mines were purchasing what kind of product, which was stuff the other men did not need to know. Now, part of my dad's job was he worked in the chem lab, the chemistry lab, and they would test different strengths of dynamite for different purposes. And what we have today is called C4. You may have heard that term before. It's a military grade of explosive. Now, it comes in blocks, and you can put a fuse in it and blow it, but you can also play baseball with it. You can throw it and catch it because it won't explode on contact. A little spooky, but you can do it. We called that PETN back in the 50s and 60s, and they just changed the name of it for the military to C4. And so there were all those kinds of things that the college graduate men could understand that the workmen couldn't. Although my dad worked in the lab, he worked with a college graduate chemist. Yeah, my dad was very smart. I wish he had not worked there because he would have gone a long ways in life with his abilities. But he gave me a good life, and I'm very grateful for that. So the difference really between the Army and Leviers was Leviers had a social structure, much like you mentioned a few moments ago, whereas the military has a very defined militaristic kind of structure, and they are totally different. The military, you know where you are because of your rank, and rank is everything. And you said it a moment ago, there is ego that goes along with that as well. The higher up you go, oftentimes the more difficult those generals get to deal with, and oftentimes they get so entrenched in their position that they aren't open-minded any longer. They don't have a vision, even in a war zone, because we were there from 1962 until 1974. You know, it was much like Afghanistan. It was a war that just was never going to end. And I'm so glad it did, because the Vietnamese people now have got good lives again. It's not a war-torn country anymore. So did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
I think so. I think the difference is that it's about function in the military, like each rank has a purpose, as opposed to in Levier's, it sounds like it's more of a caste system almost, which is like there's parallels, but there are differences.
Yeah, the parallels would be that the people that had the education had the general rank.
Yeah.
The people that didn't had the enlisted rank.
Yeah.
And they were the workmen. Yeah, and that's where the similarities came from, without a doubt.
So I want to ask a question about high performance, maybe in both those contexts, but in the military. And then you've also got all your not-for-profit experience that you did in terms of the Tour de Cure and so on. So, and you obviously have a passion for being with people and leading people. In all of your experiences, what do you think contributes to high performance in a team?
Without a doubt, confidence and communication. I think that it filters down from the top. If you have an open door policy and you lead from the front, you're right there with them, and you know what they're going through. And women, I shouldn't exclude women here. I think communication today is so different than it was back then. My father could go to the office, as he called it, where all the management people were at, and he had to wear a white uniform. All the men on the plant wore a white cloth uniform. Safety was a big deal with a dynamite factory, as you might imagine. And so they couldn't have anything but plastic buttons. They had to wear things that would not spark anything. And so when he would walk in, he was the only man in the whole building that had a white uniform on. Everybody else was in suit and tie. So he instantly knew he had changed, but he could go in there and he could request things and he could ask for things to help make the job work better. And I think that he had a good communication skill because he could sell the management on something he needed, or somebody else would fight for it and argue for it, whereas Dad would persuade. And that was another thing he kind of taught me over time was you don't bend somebody over backwards to get what you need. You need to just put your arm around them and work together. And that's what came of it. I think leadership oftentimes, a lot of people get stuck in the fact that, well, I'm up here and you're down here and I'm going to have somebody else tell you what to do down the ladder. And that doesn't really work a lot. I've got on my board here that the pandemic is teaching us a lot. And this is one of those areas where I think it's teaching us a lot because there's got to be new flexibility. There's got to be new communication skills. We've got people that are working at home and people that are working in an office and management that we don't know where they're at sometimes. They could be on a Zoom call and, in another state. And so the flexibility that's got to come out of that communication is amazing. And it's been fun to watch it change. I've been in the National Speakers Association for 8 years, and 4 years of that, I was on the board of directors as the VP of operations. And I just came off the board this past June. And last 2 years, I got to be on part of a fabulous team of people who pulled together to give our membership what they didn't have. They didn't know how to do virtual meetings when the pandemic started. We'd all been doing them in person. Who thought we'd have to suddenly be doing it on a Zoom call? What the heck is Zoom and how do I make it work? Well, we started having a class every Wednesday afternoon, and we've got 160 members in the NSA Colorado. We'd have 130, 140 people on that Zoom call learning how to do what you and I are doing today. With different kinds of backgrounds, different kinds of microphones, all kinds of stuff that we've learned to be able to use with breakout rooms and stuff. So that particular team became high performance out of necessity. We had to take care of our members because people suddenly couldn't pay their dues. Nobody had any speaking gigs anywhere. The event industry died.
That's right.
Yeah. And so our team, we went on to Zoom and we had very long meetings, 4 or 5 hours long, making decisions, putting people in charge, moving things along, and making it happen. We completely suspended our dues for 2 years. People did not have to pay their dues so that we could keep the membership. We didn't want to lose them. If they all went to work for a drugstore or a gas station, we wanted them back when they were starting to be able to get back. And we have maintained that 160. We lost about 30, which was people that were probably very new to the business and didn't have anything that could sustain them. But still, that particular team was about as high performance as I've seen in a long time. And they were so much fun to work with. And the communication and the confidence that they had filtered down to all of the members, and they felt like they were being taken care of.
A lot of leaders I speak to say that they want more confidence. And you've highlighted that communication and confidence are the things that contribute to high-performing teams. So in your experience, where do you think the confidence comes from? Is it something that you just naturally have, or can you cultivate it?
Oh, I think there are people definitely that are born with it. I can point to the generals of World War II, George Patton, who I don't know if you guys study in Australia or not. He was a famous general that was in North Africa and in Italy and ultimately Germany. I think George was probably born with confidence that was coming out his ears. I think he just had it from the get-go. And then there's guys like me that I think have to learn it along the way. Those of us that want to be leaders are oftentimes introverts. And I can point to my years of starting with Toastmasters before I started speaking professionally through NSA, that Toastmasters is what gave me the confidence. So I'm going to back up and say that I think the answer to your question is, I think it's knowledge. The more knowledgeable you are on your topic, the more confident you are in leading about it. And I think that confidence comes naturally once you know more than maybe what everybody else knows. And that comes from somebody who is dedicated and committed to studying and learning what they need to do to be able to get where they're going to go. And I think that makes a great leader when you've got a guy that studies his company, his product, his people. It's a full-time gig. CEOs are probably very, isolated in many respects. And so if they don't take the time to break that isolation and get out and meet and talk and communicate, they don't know what's going on. They really don't. They're being told what their peers think they want to hear rather than what's really happening. And I think that's sad. I think a leader that really gets his fingers dirty once in a while, walks out into the factory, they're going to know so much more about what's going on, and they'll gain the confidence, and they'll be looked upon as being a visionary, I think, because once they go and do that, the workmen are going, wow, he came down here, he talked to us. Once that becomes a regular thing, they look forward to it and they know he'll listen.
How do you do that in a hybrid remote environment? Like, you don't necessarily have a factory floor or office to wander around. So how have leaders adapted, do you think, or could adapt in this hybrid space?
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? I think that it all boils down to finding the traditional values that we all want to have in our lives and making them part of your mission statement and your planning. Once that's established and everybody can see what you really put it forth as your values, then it's up to the communication to just take place. If it is a total hybrid environment like we've got now, that means you've got people in person, you've got people on virtual. I'm giving 2 gigs next week that's exactly what they're going to be, is hybrid. And I have learned to train myself that I have to turn and talk to that camera for once in a while, not just the people that are seated in front of me. And that's what a leader has to learn to do. They got to learn to be flexible, learn how to present well, communicate well, understand the system they're dealing with, because then they can actually be with the people that are in the room. And the ones that aren't, they can still be in their office on their computer, and they still are connecting with you. We've got to connect in any way possible at this level. I think it's going to eventually start to simmer down, and we'll all get back to some resemblance of normal, but it's going to take a while. I think we're 2 or 3 years away from starting to see the end of this thing. And I think that during that time, we're going to have a lot of painful processes that we're going to have to go through. But if you stay optimistic and if you stay confident and if you delegate properly, that's something else I haven't brought up here much, but delegation is a huge deal. If you're surrounded with people who know your vision and know your mission and really understand who you are as a person, that will filter down to the people below them that they're delegating to work with. And you've got to delegate to good people, though, that you've got to have trust. If you've got somebody you're just giving a job to and setting them off to do it, you have no clue how they're handling it. And sometimes I think that can create a lot of problems if a guy at the top doesn't have his finger on the pulse of all that kind of stuff. I mean, you want to be a CEO, you want to be a leader, you got to learn that's going to take a lot of hours and a lot of work. That's why I'm divorced. So, you have to make your priorities in life and make sure that you own them. And whatever those priorities are that make you happy. I'm happier being single. I should have never gotten married. I'm happier being able to go do the stuff I do and have a blast doing it. And then I go to bed at night and I'm just totally exhausted, which is how it should be, right?
Go to bed happy and maybe
happy and exhausted.
Okay. All right, I'll take that on notice. You have this wonderful system, acronym, philosophy, TRIP. Let's talk about TRIP. I did the assessment that's available online. Tell us about TRIP, first of all, and then we can talk about the assessment piece.
Well, we kind of started talking in the beginning of the interview about how I got lost in the Himalayas, and that's where the book came from. And that's where I discovered my 4 words. I only had 3 of them, and then I had another lady in the Speakers Association that helped me kind of formulate the acronym better. But TRIP stands for tenacity, resilience, imagination, and purpose. And those 4 words fit leadership to a T. I think they are everything a good leader needs to be or help other people to be. And TRIP has just become so much fun and such an integral part of my life. I look at the pandemic and how it has really forced people to be tenacious at whatever it is they do. The people that lost their jobs had to find new incomes. The people that had jobs had to find ways to bounce back from the pandemic. The people who were at the top of businesses had to find the imagination for new ideas and be visionary and move things forward and keep the business alive. And the glue that holds it all together, purpose. If you've got the purpose, which is oftentimes a mission statement for businesses, but if you've got your purpose so well defined in the business world, you know where you're going at all times. You know what it is you're striving for. And it's not just goals. Goals are kind of like setting New Year's resolutions. They're here on New Year's Eve and they're gone the second day of January. Goals oftentimes are wishy-washy. They're not etched in stone. I like to talk a lot about the differences between virtues and values. Values are cultural based and they flex back and forth, up and down. Social media changes things. The regular media changes things, but virtues came down from Aristotle and Socrates, and they are the things that our Western civilization is founded upon. And virtues are etched in stone. They don't change. They're those leadership qualities I was reading to you a little earlier, you know, open-minded, empathetic, ethical, full of integrity, courageous. Those are the kinds of things that people need to be in order to hold good values. And TRIP is what that's all about. And this last summer, I had hit a ceiling with TRIP. And I would go, where am I going to take it from here? I need to be able to take it from here and do something else with it. So I probably shouldn't share this story, but I will anyway. I was sitting on a Saturday night watching a 1950s black and white horror movie. I think it was Frankenstein. And I'd had 2 glasses of wine and was working on my 3rd. And I had my big whiteboard set up and I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do with my business. Where's it going from here? And I started searching on the internet for all these kinds of things I've got listed on the board here today to talk with you about. And I came up with the TRIP assessment and didn't even know it until I called a lady who will be someone I'll tell you here at the end. One of your questions was, what's my favorite podcast? And I'm going to recommend her. Her name is Tamara Gandor, and I'll send you the information on it in an email. She owns a company called Go to Launch Street, and her assessment that she developed a number of years ago is called the Innovation Quotient. And her assessment has been wildly successful because she works in the innovation space, which she'd be a great interview for you on your podcast. She was past president of NSA the year I joined. Because of that assessment that I designed that night, we spent almost 3 months making mine. And that's what you took. And we had to design the questions. We had to design the answers. We had to design the algorithm that would test people with it. It took a long time. 3 months is a long time to develop something like that. But I think, well, you answer a question for me. I'll turn the tables. Did you like the assessment?
Yeah. Everybody likes to find out more about themselves. That's what I know about any kind of leadership work. It's like, it's always interesting to see yourself through an assessment lens or through a profiling lens. And so what I liked about it, it gives me a diagnosis where I'm sitting across this, and then tangible, actionable things. And so there's 3 different levels, I think, across each of the 4 virtues. Right.
Passive, active, and super active.
I didn't get any passives. I got 1 active, which was the tenacity one. And the other 3 were super active. I'm like, that suits my high achieving gold star in compulsion. So I'm like, yes, gold stars in 3 areas and a silver star in tenacity. And then it gave me 3 things that I could do to, like, here are the example, like the 3 things to work on to build from active to super active would be Do interval training. I'm like, okay, yeah, I know how to do that. Collaborate with 3 people. I'm like, I don't do that many collaborations. So that was like, And then task prioritization. I'm like, I do that pretty well. So that was like, So I got something to chew on there. I'm like, okay. So this tenacity thing, having to collaborate with people, I can see how that builds it. And then with the other 3 areas that are super active, still had suggestions on what I could do there. So I've written them all down. I can get to play with all these things as well. And some of the suggestions I already have embedded, and some of them were new. And the big takeaway for me in doing this is that I actually need to be working with more people. And so instead of being just a solo operator, as I have been for the last 8 years, building collaboration is kind of the next evolutionary step for me. So that's a summary of my results and what I got from it. And I definitely think that people will get heaps from them doing this. So we'll put a link in the show notes where people can go and take the trip assessment.
Cool. Yeah, it's exceedingly cheap. It's $47, and it's it's just not a tough thing for most people to take. But it's nice to hear your comments, and thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing them with me and your audience. You know that you're going to get an email each week for the next 4 weeks, keeping the thinking going. So you're going to get more action steps and more suggestions for 4 weeks, all for $47. It's a big deal, I think, a good deal. It will help people look at different areas of their life, hopefully from just different angles. High achievers like you, I would expect to get the kind of scores you did. I'm trying to talk a lot of the businesses that I'm doing my talks to give the assessment to new hires so they can find out where they're weak before they go on the job. And that way they know what they're getting and they know how they can help them. And I think that will be a benefit oftentimes to employers that maybe, I know they've got all kinds of other assessments that are out there that are highly technical and highly respected, but mine's kind of down to earth. I mean, I'm from a down to earth background from the years of DuPont. I grew up with blue collar men. My roots are in the blue collar. I understand people at that level, but I've also worked at the high levels, of military, even though I was enlisted, and at the high levels of a lot of the nonprofits where I've had to really give a lot of advice to. And I think that having that kind of spread in my life has given me the ability to see the top and the bottom and understand the middle.
That's perfect. So what are your couple of key tips for listeners? One is obviously go and do the trip assessment and get started on that, building your own personal resilience, et cetera. So what are some other key tips for listeners?
Well, we hit on 2 of them, and you're right. I have people take the assessment, and then I had the second one that I had written down was know your staff and your employees' scores and help them. If you're doing it from a business point of view of a CEO, looking at it as high performance, looking at each individual letter of TRIP individually is important. You need to break it down. Don't look at it as a combination of words. Take each word individually. How tenacious are you in a pandemic? How resilient are you to bounce back? Where is your imagination? And how do you brainstorm with your crew? And how do you come up with new visions and ideas? And then, how do you strike that mission statement to be something that everybody top to bottom in the company can accept and get behind? That's oftentimes a real challenge because you're going to have the skeptics that say, they're just trying to make us work harder. They're trying to get more grape juice out of the grape. It's hard for people that don't see the vision at the top well enough at the bottom. And translating that is so important, I think, where we're at today. And then leading from the front, which that phrase means you're on the ground with the troops. You're the guy out front with the sword leading the charge. That's who you are. And that's how they need to see you so that they know that the face of the company is confident and strong and got the ability and is humble, but yet ethical, has all of those things that they really want to have in a leader. I think that's where TRIP stands out, is taking those 4 words and really etching them into stone and making them of value, something that people can really count on. I think you asked about one other thing. You said, what do teams do when they get stuck? I think it's lack of innovation. I think teams get stale. And so I actually did a blog yesterday on it, where I think that people at the top need to do those weekend retreats where they bus everybody together to a mountain retreat somewhere. And boy, they spend 3 or 4 days, hammering it out, working together, becoming that team that can really be high productive and work together, but working on innovation. I think innovation and imagination kind of go hand in hand. And I think that if you're not innovative, if you're not coming up with new ideas, the staff gets stale. So bring in a speaker, bring in a facilitator, bring in somebody that can make that weekend retreat powerful. Have them lead you through what you need to get done. I've gone to some of those with just really great facilitators, and we had wonderful ideas when we were done. And the last thing I would offer you is look for the bad apples and get rid of them. The bad apples in your staff, in your workforce, have a way to be able to weed them out, because bad apples have a way of expanding into other apples. And suddenly you've got a whole bunch of bad apples listening to one that shouldn't be saying what they're saying to begin with. You need to have everybody on board, have them working with the common goal on a common path. It'll all work out if you do, but the bad apples can cause you lots of problems.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I think that's a really useful reminder for people around that bad apple thing, because it's always like, how do I get rid of them? When do I?
Yeah, it's not easy. Nobody wants to have to fire anybody, but oftentimes we hear the words repurpose a lot these days. Well, apply that to your people. Repurpose them. Why is the bad apple bad? Does he just hate the job and you need to put him in a different function? Maybe he would flourish over here, or over here he's just bored to tears. You never know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But finding a new place for them might be the turnaround. So we talked a little bit about, you had one mention for favorite podcast, Tamara Gandour. Is that right?
Gandour, Ghandour.
Gandour. Perfect. And did you have another book or podcast, or was that the main one?
Yeah, that's the main one. I don't have a lot of time to follow a lot of podcasts. I'm working up most of the time, and I'm generally a guest on them. So yeah. I'm reading Angela Duckworth's book called Grit right now.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mainly because of her experience with the military academy, where they had a 50% dropout rate, and her assessment turned that around. When her book came out, I didn't really pay it a lot of attention because assessments weren't on my radar. But when mine suddenly came onto my radar, her book suddenly became really important. So I've been working my way through it. I'm almost done. So that would be a book.
That is a good book.
If you haven't seen her TED Talk, people should go watch it.
Absolutely. Keith, where can people find out more about you and the trip assessment?
Well, my name is not always easily spelled. And so I came up with the triptechnique.com. And that seems to be the quickest and easiest because everybody can spell Trip Technique.
Perfect.
And that will take you to my website, which has everything about my speaking and my book, and the assessment is all on there. And I've got a series of baseball caps I've had made.
Uh-huh. Okay, that's imagination. Yeah.
I've got one
Beautiful.
for each of the letters. So I've got Trip. So when I'm on stage, I actually change caps.
Very good.
For whatever topic I'm talking about. So it's a gimmick, but it's a lot of fun. But people can buy them. I'm finding people like them. So
yeah, right. Perfect. I love it. Keith, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful stories and all your wonderful insights. It's been an absolute joy to have a giggle and a deep dive into your experience.
That's great. I'm so glad I could give you a happy afternoon after our rocky beginning.
Well, we made it and it was worthwhile. So thanks so much.
I agree. And thank you so much.
I had so much fun talking with Keith. He is just wonderful. I loved his storytelling. I love his easy manner. I loved his humility. I loved how much work he's put into thinking about these principles and these ideas, and his obvious care and concern for his fellow humans. Yeah, just made me feel good talking with him. The biggest takeaway for me in this interview is probably around the difference between virtues and values. And I don't think virtues get enough attention these days. Certainly values do, in terms of what's important to us in business and in teams and how we need to pay attention to our values. But these idea of virtues, of honing these characteristics, these self-disciplines, these principles to help us be better humans and better leaders, I think is worthy of paying more attention. Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. I'd love to hear your thoughts. feel free to drop a note on our Facebook page. The link is in the show notes, or send me an email, zoe@zoerouth.com, or a message on LinkedIn. I love hearing from listeners. It makes my day to know that people are tuning in and getting value from these shows. If you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, be sure to sign up at zoerouth.com, click on podcast, and you can get email notifications every week when a special episode comes out. Well, every episode is special, and they come out every week. And then we might have some special notifications about extra tidbits for you. All right. Well, that's it for today. In the meantime, live well, lead well.
You've been listening to the Zoe Routh Leadership Podcast with leadership expert Zoe Routh. For more about people stuff and to contact Zoe, go to zoerouth.com.